This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
This episode is brought to you by Google Gemini. With the Gemini app, you can talk live and have a real-time conversation with an AI assistant. It's great for all kinds of things, like if you want to practice for an upcoming interview, ask for advice on things to do in a new city, or brainstorm creative ideas. And by the way, this script was actually read by Gemini. Download the Gemini app for iOS and Android today. Must be 18 plus to use Gemini Live.
It is Monday, December 30th, 2024. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, Slate's sports podcast. Back with you again. I'm Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer for Slate, and I am the co-host of the college football podcast Split Zone Duo. We have a fun year-ending show for you today. We will talk about the burgeoning war for Christmas being waged between two sports leagues, the NFL and the NBA. We will check in with Alex Ovechkin's effort to break what some have considered one of the ultimate unbreakable records in team sports, Wayne Gretzky's 894 goal mark in the NHL, and we will weigh in on the rise of the altcast, once a broadcasting tool reserved for special occasions, but now seemingly just part of the tapestry of how networks present all kinds of games. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the founder and the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the biggest stories of the moment in women's sports. Lindsay, how are you?
I am doing great. I am pumped. Let's end this year strong, friends.
You know, if you're not doing great in these couple of days between holidays where hopefully you're getting to kick back just a little bit, then when can you be doing great? It really is a big question.
It's like eating standing up. Like, these days don't really count. Anything you do in these days is just like a bonus. It's great.
Completely agree. And of course, we have Ben Lindbergh. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer. He co-hosts Effectively Wild, a great baseball podcast. Ben, it is almost 2025.
That it is. And I'm sort of sorry to see 2024 go, if only because getting to do this show with you two has been a highlight of my year. So thanks to you. Thanks to our listeners for making this year a bit brighter.
Completely agree.
Oh, pretend I said what Ben said.
Yeah.
I know the holidays
Ben's making us all look really bad.
Holidays can also be a time of spikes and depression. I know it's not always a happy time, but it is always happy for me on a Monday morning when I get to talk to you two.
Ben is the nicest man in podcasting. Before we get into more of that podcasting, as always, we want to say thanks to our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. One method of saying thanks is with a bonus episode. And this week, we will share notes on a few underrated sports stories from this past year that everyone should watch very closely in 2025 and beyond. You can hear that episode right now, as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen to podcasts. This episode is brought to you by Public.Com. Interest rates have fallen, but you can still lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com. That's a pretty big deal, because when rates drop, so can the interest you earn on your investment. A bond account allows you to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high-yield and investment-grade corporate bonds. So while other people are watching their return shrink, you could be earning regular interest payments. But the yield is not locked in until you invest, so check it out. The good news is it only takes a couple of minutes to sign up at Public.com. Lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account only at Public.com/hangup. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA plus SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed, not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosure/bond-account for more info. Christmas used to be the NBA's day, or I guess strictly speaking, it used to be Christianity's day. But in terms of sports organizations dominating the airwaves on that day and using Christmas as a major television showcase, Christmas Day was indeed the NBA's. The Basketball League has been playing Christmas Day games since its second season in 1947, and in recent decades, the day has become a marquee regular season spot for the league. There's a Mariah Carey music video. There's been Shaq against Kobe. There's been all manner of vintage LeBron performances, Doncic's 50-point performance just last year. But the NFL in the last few years has had a lot to say about this. For the better part of the 70s and 80s, it explicitly avoided Christmas because of both political pressure and a worry of being seen as disrupting Christmas dinners around the nation. Not very good stewardship of this national pastime that's been developing in football. And so the NFL gradually got to playing more Christmas games a few decades ago, and now it plays special Christmas Day games every year, including this season's doubleheader on Netflix. This year's games themselves were frankly terrible, especially if you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan like I am, losing badly at home to the Kansas City Chiefs. The Baltimore Ravens also beat up on the Houston Texans. But lots of people watched, and Beyonce's halftime show in one of the games was a lot of fun, of course. The games averaged around 24 million viewers. According to Nielsen, that day's national NBA games averaged more like 5 million viewers, which was actually seen as a pretty big success, which speaks to what a juggernaut the NFL now is. Of course, the NBA's games were better. LeBron beat Steph Curry in a marquee Lakers-Warriors game, and after that game, LeBron said into a microphone, quote, "I love the NFL, but Christmas is our day." Lindsay, does LeBron have a point?
He does. I mean, I personally absolutely love this. I think the NBA really, really failed by not having merch immediately ready that said Christmas is our day. Could they upset some Christians? But they already do that, so that doesn't matter. Make some money. But anyways, I think that this Christmas was just a breath of fresh air for the NBA, which people talk about how people talk about the NBA as much as they talk about the NBA itself. And it can become just like a really exhausting self-referential circle. But I do think that the quality of these games, Knicks Spurs, we had that on at one of my family events, which we usually don't have sports on in the background. That's not always been a part of our Christmas celebration. I then listened to the surprisingly exciting ending of the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the Miami Heat on my drive to another Christmas celebration. And then, really had a good time watching the 76ers beat the Celtics and in that upset. And then watching, of course, the LeBron Steph masterclass. I went to bed before the final game because I was in a Christmas coma. But, we've talked about on the show before, you're not guaranteed exciting games. You could never really pencil those in or schedule those. But there was something to me that just felt really culturally significant about the NBA having these really thrilling games while the NFL had snooze fest. The ratings maybe don't tell the story as much as I'm feeling it, which is annoying because I like when numbers back me up. But overall, I think this day was a win for both leagues. And for the NBA, that's huge because they've just been having a series of losses lately.
Yeah, I actually come from a mostly non-sports watching family. And as we mentioned last week, Christmas is my birthday. So as far as I'm concerned, Christmas is my day. Sorry, LeBron, and sorry, NFL. But as far as the rest of the country is concerned, yeah, with all due respect to LeBron and the greatness of the NBA's games, any day the NFL claims is the NFL's day, ultimately. Football's popularity just dwarfs the popularity of anything else, which we can sort of see from LeBron's own social media. Of his last 4 tweets, excluding a sponsored sports betting ad on Christmas Eve, 3 have been about football, including a December 27th tweet about how he was playing Madden. So even though NFL really dominated, if you look at the overall numbers, you mentioned some of them, Alex, but more than 24 million viewers on average watching in the U.S. We don't have the global ratings yet as we speak. 27 million were watching Beyonce, and 65 million was the peak for watching at least 1 minute of one of the games at some point, that is. So these were all...
That's a fake number.
Yeah, that's, you put it on by accident, basically, and you don't click away fast enough. But still, still, those are streaming highs for football. But I think what we learned is that Christmas is big enough for both of them. It's not actually a zero-sum game. And yes, the NBA had an incredible lineup, and we didn't even mention Knicks versus Spurs, and the Knicks topping the Spurs despite 42 points from Wemby, and on top of LeBron versus Steph, and then the Sixers upsetting the Celtics. That's kind of a killer lineup, but still 5.25 million viewers on average, peaking at more than 8 million during Lakers Warriors. This was the most watched NBA Christmas slate in 5 years. And that's even with the NFL trying to annex that day on the calendar. So it was huge for the NBA, and it quieted all of the doom and gloom and the NBA ratings talk, at least for the short term. And yet the NFL just completely trounced the NBA when you look at the overall rating. So that's just a reflection of the standing of football in the U.S.
I think that NBA ratings talk that you've probably gotten whiffs of if you're reading any sports business coverage at all is an important backdrop for why this was even a conversation topic, and frankly, why we're talking about it here on Hang Up. It does seem like there's a league-wide existential crisis going on in the NBA right now over a couple months of down television ratings, which, by the way, are now less down because of the Christmas Day games. I always advocate that as a fan of these sports, you shouldn't care. You know, you're not going to get a discount on your cable bundle or on your tickets if the TV ratings go up or down. It doesn't really affect you. And it's not like college sports where it affects conference realignment and who your opponents are. But a lot of people seem really worried about this and have no list of 3, 2, 1, and have a list of theories that is dozens of items long about why the NBA has not been grabbing television viewers the way that it has been. Maybe we could get into them, but I would urge people just to sort of relax and see how it unfolds. And I think the Christmas Day games doing pretty well by the NBA's recent standards might be something pointing in that direction, that everyone should just relax a little bit.
Everything ebbs and flows in sports except the NFL. But, there's always going to be peaks and valleys. And I think at the end of the day, if you believe like I do that basketball is a really fun sport, that there is tons of talent in the NBA, then, ultimately it's going to be durable, even if there are some years where ratings are down 10%. I think one of the most perplexing things about the panic over like this tiny ratings decrease this year has been that the NBA just finalized a $76 billion 11-year television contract. Things are fine. The NBA is fine. Everybody is going to have their bills paid in the NBA. Coming from a world of women's sports where the television ratings going down a peak could mean the end of the league's existences, right? Like it's seen as a verdict or ruling on an entire gender and their ability to play sports if like 100,000 less people watch a game. It's startling to me to see the panic in a league that is right now so financially healthy and shows no signs of slowing down any of that financial health anytime soon.
I do understand why fans care about ratings. I think partly there's just a tribalism aspect to it. It's our league versus your league, unless you're someone who likes all the leagues and you just want your league to be at the top of the heap. I also think, though, and people say the same thing about box office figures or scripted TV ratings, this isn't your problem. This is the network executives. What does it matter to you? I do think that when you're talking about, say, box office figures, well, you want a movie that you like to do well so that they make more movies like that. And also with sports, I think part of the reason that we all care so much about sports is the perception that a lot of other people care about sports, too. It's kind of a communal thing. And I think there's something to the idea that, oh, my sport is on the upswing. More and more people are caring about this. It's growing, it's gaining steam, as opposed to, I've been a baseball fan my whole life, and I've just heard the refrain, baseball is dying my entire life, which is also oversold. But I think there's something to the idea of, people want to get on the bandwagon when they feel like something is gaining in popularity. And sports are silly, right? There's only meaning in them in the sense that we ascribe meaning to them. And I think a big part of that is the fact that that elsewhere in the world, elsewhere in the country, many, many millions of other people are watching those things and caring about those things. So I do think there's some import to that, but it's also oversold because, yes, even if the NBA ratings are down slightly, the league is not going anywhere. The supply of NBA games is not in jeopardy. If anything, there's an excess of them. But I think what we did learn here is just how well streaming can work for live sports, which is not news exactly, but this did further confirm it because Netflix paid $150 million for these couple games and seemingly got its money's worth. And also the league, last year's 3 Christmas games in the NFL aired on CBS, ABC, and Fox, and averaged 28 million viewers. And when it's all said and done, the ratings are going to be quite similar domestically on Netflix. And different from the Paul versus Tyson fight that we talked about on Hang Up and all the buffering and streaming and possibly unintentional mooning issues that we got in that game. This worked. We got pristine picture quality. We didn't get a whole lot of buffering. It was not an amateurish production. You had kind of the A broadcast crew. Things went smoothly for the most part. So this did sort of demonstrate that, yeah, this can work and people will tune in to watch it. And this wasn't even a primetime game, right? Plus, it was a Wednesday, not even a big traditional football day. Next year, Christmas will be on a Thursday. There will be games on Netflix and Prime Video. So it's just another nail in the coffin, I guess, of traditional broadcasting and a feather in the cap of streaming services.
Yeah, just a couple of points. First of all, we really need to stress how incredible Beyonce was. I just want to take a note that ultimately it was Beyonce's day. Sorry, Ben.
I'll allow it.
But that was remarkable. That was really the only time I tuned in. As someone who just found out that Netflix will be the broadcaster for the Women's World Cup, the upcoming 2 Women's World Cups, which is fascinating and something I have yet to really dig into. But I was relieved that there were fewer buffering issues and that the production of the live sporting events went much more seamlessly than the fight that we unfortunately watched. But also, it would be disingenuous not to mention how the culture wars has shaped these conversations and how bad faith attacks on the right wanting to say that the NBA is dying because of Black Lives Matter and because of being slightly more progressive on social issues than people are comfortable with. Although, we're talking margins here.
With limits. Yeah.
We're talking margins here. That, any ratings decline by the NBA is seen in some corners as a reason to trash Black athletes and their politics. And it's bullshit. I'm sorry. There's just nothing more to say about that. At the same time, both sides have tried to claim NFL viewership over the years as meaning something either that, it's bad because they didn't have Kaepernick back, so they're not woke enough, or they're too woke. It's been on both sides. These leagues and these players, especially the Black players in both leagues, being treated as political pawns does add a layer to this conversation that I think raises the stakes in a way I'm not comfortable with.
And Lindsay, you mentioned that the NBA is somewhat plotted because the ink is just freshly dry on new TV deals. I think that both of these leagues in different ways have to come at the problem of the attention environment that we talk about often on this show and capturing people's brains for as long as you possibly can in a time where it is hard to do that. And every sport has its own way of worrying about that. Baseball has the pitch clock. Soccer has, I think, been the one sport that has sort of solved this by having games that take relatively the same amount of time. College football is extremely worried about it and has made clock changes to keep things moving. I think the NFL has kind of a different problem, which is that it needs to make sure that it does not get too close to the sun and oversaturate people at times when they are not ready for tons and tons of NFL football. Now, maybe that oversaturation point doesn't exist because the NFL defies the laws of business and of our attention spans. That's very possible. Whereas I think the NBA is kind of on the other side of this equation, and that's why this Christmas Day conflict is so interesting. The NBA has been trying for years to get people, from watching cool Instagram, TikTok, Twitter clips of Steph Curry to actually sitting through a Warriors game. And that's been the big trouble. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, has talked about snacks as those social media videos. And, you want people to have the full meal of actually going and watching an NBA game. I think Christmas is an interesting microcosm of this dynamic that both of these leagues are facing, because the NBA thinks that Christmas Day, or has historically thought that Christmas Day, is a time when you will actually get people to sit down and watch your games on television. The NBA doesn't have a problem generating social media impressions. But on Christmas Day, you've got a captive audience. You got people in their houses with their families, so they're going to watch the NBA. Whereas I think the NFL does not have this problem. People are going to watch no matter what. So the NFL doesn't even necessarily need to be on Christmas. The NFL can put a game, in theory, at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, and people will turn it on. They'll dig up whatever slop the NFL puts on their plate because it's the NFL. I think if you're the NFL, you have a little bit, I should say, less to lose by just sort of experimenting with a day like this, because if it doesn't work, who cares? Like Ben, you just said it. You'll put the games on a Thursday next year because it's Christmas, and then maybe in a future year, if there's no appetite for Christmas football, that's fine. People will watch the NFL any day. I think the NBA doesn't quite have that luxury, and so they really need the Christmas thing to work. And Lindsay, I think you make a great point about the political dynamics between these two leagues. I also just think there's a scheduling thing at play.
Mm-hmm. I think there is also another scheduling angle to this, which is that it's fairly easy for the NBA to play games on Christmas because they're playing games all the time. It's a little more complicated for the NFL to schedule games on Christmas, which has not stopped it from doing so and will not stop it from doing so. But it does come with a cost, especially if the Christmas day falls on a non-traditional football day. So in order to get these games on this day, I mean, you've had all sorts of teams having to rearrange their schedules. You've had the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Texans, your Steelers, Alex, having played 3 games in 11 days. And the Chiefs have played on every day of the week this season except for Tuesday. And Chiefs defensive tackle Chris Jones suggested that if a team plays a schedule like that, so many games in such a short span of time, it should be compensated with a late season bye, which is something that he's going to take to the NFLPA this offseason. I guess the Chiefs will get a first round bye anyway. But it's a little tougher to rearrange football schedules based on a holiday. The other thing is that because it's not as much of a tradition to play on Christmas in the NFL as it is in the NBA, some players don't seem super psyched about it, about missing the holiday with their families, etc. Lamar Jackson was asked if it was special to play on Christmas Day for the second straight year, and he said, I mean, it is. That means we're good. But at the same time, I do want to celebrate at home sometimes with my family now. I don't want to be playing on Christmas all the time. Not all the time. Well, bad news, you're probably going to have to. So, it's not the worst thing in the world. These guys are well compensated, and, it's something that goes with the territory in professional sports that you're just not entirely in control of your schedule and your whereabouts. But sort of stinks. Most of us wouldn't want to do that.
Up next, in hockey, the Great 8 is healthy again and getting awfully close to the Great 1. We will discuss.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today? Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. And that's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you can save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states and situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
This episode is brought to you by Bleacher Report. How do you follow sports? From college football to the NBA, Bleacher Report brings you the latest news, live scores, and epic highlights from your favorite leagues, teams, and athletes, all in one app. Dive into exclusive shows hosted by your favorite athletes and original Bleacher Report series with breaking news, rumors, and predictions all season long. Download Bleacher Report to personalize your coverage.
Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen. Alex Kirshner here with Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs. There are not a lot of truly unbreakable records. We talked last week about what I loosely suspect will be one, Rickey Henderson's 1,406 stolen bases in the major leagues. But we moved this week to a record that a lot of people thought for an awfully long time would never fall, but now sure seems like it's going to. And that, of course, is Wayne Gretzky's 894 goals in professional hockey in the NHL. Gretzky passed Gordie Howe when he scored his 802nd goal in 1994. That is the year that I was born. I am 30. And then Gretzky played another 5 years in stacking his total of goals to almost 900. Alex Ovechkin is the game's greatest goal scorer since Gretzky and has been a good bet for a while to get to number 2 on the goals scored list, but the Russian captain of the Washington Capitals had slowed down a bit late in his career and just gotten old. At the end of the season in 2023, he was at 822 goals. Remember, 894 is the magic number, and he was about to play his next season as a 38-year-old. He started last year pretty slowly too, and even with a strong finish, did not have his usual year. But Ovechkin has really picked it up this year, even though he wound up with just 31 last year, one of his lowest totals ever. In fact, his lowest total in a full season. This year, he started with 15 goals in 18 games, a gangbusters pace even by his standards, when he fractured his left fibula on November 18th. He came back Saturday night after missing 5 weeks and change, and he scored again, and then he scored again on Sunday. And now you look up, and Ovechkin is 39 years old and sitting on 870 goals, 24 shy of Gretzky, with 46 Capitals games still to play this season. On the pace that he's been on, he's going to get there quickly, though we'll see if he can keep that up. It would be difficult. And also the Capitals are really good, with the best points percentage as a team in the Eastern Conference. Ben, it seems like it's a matter of time. Is it?
It certainly does seem so now, and the question is it a matter of this season, or will it have to wait until next season? And, I guess it hasn't gotten that much press lately, partly probably because the nature of breaking a record like this, it's a really long time coming, so it's hard to maintain hype until it's really close. And there's still some suspense, as we said, about whether he'll break the record this season, but not that much about whether it will be broken eventually, barring some sort of disaster. Probably hasn't helped that Ovechkin has supported Putin even after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has made him a little less of a sympathetic figure in this country. Gretzky, of course, is of Ukrainian descent. But at this point, the Capitals have 46 games to go. In Ovi's last 46 games across the past 2 seasons, he scored 32 goals. And as you said, 17 and 20 this year, even 15 in his last 26 last year. So that would suggest that he's going to blow by it. Even if we look at his last 46 games of last season alone, he scored 25, which is how many he needs to pass Gretzky at this point. So it's not a given. That's presuming that he plays every single game and doesn't fracture any more fibulas. And again, he is 39 years old, and the Caps, they might have some incentive to rest him at some point prior to the playoffs, but he has kind of caught up. And what strikes me is how similar Ovechkin and Gretzky's goal-scoring averages are over the course of their careers. If you'll let me nerd out for a second, Gretzky is at .601 goals per game. Ovi's at .602. They both average 49 goals per 82 games. They've both played almost the same number of games. Ovi is 39 games behind him. They both played 20 seasons. Gretzky started and finished slightly younger. The difference is that Gretzky had a higher peak as a goal scorer, whereas Ovi has been more metronomic. So Ovi's single season high is 65 goals. Gretzky's is a record 92 in 2 fewer games. And Gretzky was a better young goal scorer, but Ovi's been a better old goal scorer. So Gretzky in his first 10 seasons had a .82 goals per game. In his last 10 seasons, .36. So as a 90s kid and a New Yorker, my clearest memories of Gretzky are from his time with the Rangers at the tail end of his career when he'd already broken the record and was just adding on. He was still playing in every game and leading the league in assists, but wasn't that great a goal scorer by then. Whereas Ovi, first 10 seasons, .63 goals per game. Last 10 seasons, 0.58, almost the same, which suggests to me that he might have a lot left. And also, I think helps explain how, as you said, this sort of snuck up on us. He was behind Gretzky's pace, and he has caught up more and more as time has gone on.
When I moved to DC in 2015, I think the first thing that really hit me, beyond all the political stuff that was going on in DC in 2015 and the fact that I moved there to work in a politics newsroom, was the love that the city had for Ovi and how his personality and his game and his charisma just really, I mean, it's baked into the way they sing the national anthem in Washington, D.C. or any of the DMV areas where they really emphasize the O of the O say, can you see, in honor of Ovi. And they do that at Maryland games now. Maryland women's basketball games, you'll hear people in the crowd doing that.
Yes. This is interesting because this certainly started with the Baltimore Orioles, the O's.
Right.
But I don't think that it was in vogue in the District of Columbia until Alex Ovechkin gave DC people something to owe about.
Yeah, it's definitely, they claim it as an Ovi thing. Of course, the Orioles, that's a very good point that might explain the Maryland women's basketball love. But it's multiple sporting events, it's just baked into the culture there. And, seeing him win the Stanley Cup and party in the summer of Ovi, I think the most special thing about this record, or one of the most special things, is that barring a really seismic event that happens in the next few months, all of these goals are going to be scored with one franchise in the same uniform. And that's really rare in pro sports these days, even hockey, where you see less player movement. And looking into this, and I think noticing the ways that Ted Leonsis, who I heartily consider a beacon of sports management and good tidings when it comes to decisions in sports contracts, but he's been able to forge a relationship with Ovechkin and his family and make some decisions there, betting on the long term, that have really paid off well and stabilized the franchise in pretty special ways. And I'm sure there are arguments for ways things could have gone different years. And there were a lot of years of falling short in the playoffs. There's been a lot of pressure on Ovi's shoulders always. And every few years you get the, well, should they trade him? Is he living up to this contract? All these questions. That's just the cycle of sports talk. But ultimately, I think one of the reasons this has flown under the radar is because I think Ovi's career has flown a little bit under the radar because he's stayed in one place, because he's not part of these big off-season swings and discussions, and also because he is good friends with Putin, and that is awkward.
Yes, I do think the discussion of why this isn't being discussed more is really interesting. His relationship with Vladimir Putin, which he has barely backed off of, even in light of the Russian invasion into Ukraine, is a reasonable theory. And the Capitals dealt with a lot of bad press about this, frankly, in the opening months of that war. But then I think mostly we're able to get people to move on, right? Like, the New York Times went and wrote a big story about this. People talk about it on social media regularly, but it's not really in the mainstream coverage of the team at this point, after the Capitals sort of weathered it and Ovechkin came up with a line that you probably don't believe, that he has to maintain this relationship for the safety of his family, some of whom are in Russia. But I think there are other things, Ben, that I'm interested in getting your take on about why this story may not be getting the pub that you would think it would get, certainly that it would get if this were a home run chase in baseball. One idea is that it's just hockey not breaking through still as a sport, a couple decades into Gary Bettman's tenure as commissioner, and that even though the NHL is back on ESPN now after a long time away, it just is not a national obsession here, and people just aren't especially interested in it. One of my favorite theories, though I'm not saying I share it, but I just love it when people float it, is that the Canadian media that dominates the sport is so in love with Wayne Gretzky that they don't want anyone to talk about a Russian taking it from the Canadian Idol. As you mentioned, he is of Ukrainian descent. this isn't just my social circles feeling this way. If you look up the Google Trends reports, Alex Ovechkin is not getting much more interest right now than he does in a typical season. And certainly not like anything what he got when they were winning the Stanley Cup back in 2018 with the Capitals. What do you think is at play in this being a somewhat muted story?
And Gretzky, for his part, to be clear, has been supportive and has said that he's looking forward to Ovi breaking his record and that he'll be the first to shake his hand, etc. So there's no public bitterness or bad blood there. I do think it is partly, yes, hockey's place in the national or international sporting landscape and the culture just in general. I think it might also have something to do with the fact that no one is arguing that Ovechkin is a better player than Gretzky. Gretzky was just such a transcendent star. Now, I said that Gretzky was a better young goal scorer than Ovi. Ovi's been a better old goal scorer. I think he's also just a better goal scorer, period, than Gretzky. But that was just one dimension of Gretzky's game. And I have some stats and hypotheticals here, too. I do sometimes think about how if hockey took the approach that baseball does and combined career stats produced in different major leagues, then the NHL would count the stats of the World Hockey Association, which folded and was partly absorbed by the NHL after Gretzky's rookie year in the WHA. In that case, Gretzky would have 940 goals, not counting playoffs. Of course, Gordie Howe would have 975. Anyway, if we're playing what-if games in Gretzky's favor, though, we could do the same for Ovechkin, who lost more games to lockouts and, of course, COVID than Gretzky did. Ovi would have made his NHL debut a year earlier, if not for the 04-05 season being canceled because of the lockout. And also, and this is, I think, an underrated point, Ovechkin has played during a significantly lower offense era than Gretzky's. So if you weight basically by the league average goal scoring rate and how much Ovi and Gretzky played in their respective seasons, the average during Ovechkin's career has been 2.85 goals per team per game. During Gretzky's career, it was 3.5. So that's 23% more scoring in Gretzky's era. If you multiply Ovi's total by that much, he'd have 1,068 goals. So there's that. Plus, Ovechkin has outscored the closest player during the span in which he's played by significantly more than Gretzky outscored the closest player during his career. And they're also just very different players. Ovechkin's much bigger and more physical than Gretzky. He gets praised for the strength and speed of his shots, whereas Gretzky gets more praise for finesse and accuracy, and people say his shot was sort of sneaky fast. There's nothing sneaky about Ovechkin. And the other thing is that while Ovi's a good playmaker, his greatest strength is scoring, while Gretzky was even better at setting up other players than at being the finisher himself. So the real unbreakable record is Gretzky's 2,857 points, or his 1,963 assists, which is famously more than anyone else has in goals and assists combined.
Yes.
So people talk about Ovi's office being the left face-off circle where he scored a lot of his goals with his one-timers, whereas Gretzky's office was the back of the net, where he wasn't scoring, he was setting up other players' goals. So yes, Ovi will probably surpass Gretzky's goal total, but scoring was sort of Gretzky's secondary skill. So maybe that's part of it. And we're not necessarily having the LeBron versus MJ, who's the GOAT debate. We're having the who will have the most goals debate, but I don't think anyone is suggesting that Ovechkin is challenging Gretzky's status as an overall player.
No, you can do this, a version of what I'm about to do with just about any hockey player in history. But I think one of the most telling things about Wayne Gretzky, and it goes to your last point there, is that he has 1,390 more points than Ovechkin, which is almost the entire career's worth of points of Sidney Crosby, who is the one player generally regarded to be ahead of Ovechkin of the last 20 years. Though Lindsay, I know, is going to shake her head as a Capitals fan at that, and we'll never find agreement on it. The gap between Gretzky and anybody in points is basically tantamount to the career of any number of the best players of all time in their total points output, which is really quite something. Although I do think that the American mind may not be able to comprehend the concept of points in hockey. And so you would think that just goals, how many times puck go in net might be the record that would draw more people's attention.
Right.
I don't know. Lots of play.
We're all about individualism, self-reliance. Why would you give up the puck to someone else? Just put it in the net yourself.
Just to clarify, I'm a Hurricanes fan, not a Capitals fan. I just lived in D.C.
Okay.
You know what? That's fair. That's slander. What I just did to you was slander. Yes.
My uncle, if he listens,
that was ridiculous of me to do that. And I do apologize to your uncle and to the entire extended Gibbs family for that.
Thank you.
It will be interesting to see where the NHL goes promotionally for this as it gets closer. It's not like the league is completely ignoring it, but this is the kind of thing that in general you would expect the league and its media partners to go into overdrive for as it gets closer. Any college football fan will remember the late summer of Aaron Judge a few years ago, in which many football games were disrupted by live look-ins at Judge's at-bats. Hockey's a little bit harder to do that. Maybe you could do it on a power play when you have the man advantage if you're expecting an Ovechkin goal, but it could happen at any time. It's not like it's not like a home run, which can only happen when the batter is at the plate. It will be something to see how the NHL rolls this out and how they balance it with the Putin thing, which the NHL is pretty acutely dealing with in terms of putting on an international competition where there won't be a Russian team. International hockey is doing that in general. I think that the geopolitics are, without giving too much credit to anybody for taking a moral stand against Vladimir Putin or anything like that, are a thing that I am sure the NHL will be weighing here. Mm-hmm. So much to consider as we think about how this sort of circus will unfold.
And Ovechkin already holds the record for most career power play goals, so that's something. And yeah, I think this is going to be a bigger story as it gets closer. We're just ahead of the game here at Hang Up.
Yeah, ESPN is silly if they don't take advantage of having the rights to this and, doing a lot of cross promotion of it. And I think it could be a really good thing to kind of bring hockey back into, the more mainstream conversation.
Lindsay, it's funny that you should mention cross promotion and ESPN broadcasts. We will talk after the break about altcasts, which are now inescapable.
Traveling to see your fave sports team is cool, but traveling with Amex Platinum for the big game is even better.
Right this way.
With access to dedicated card member entrances at select events, you can skip the line.
And one.
And with access to the Centurion Lounge,
He shoots a three.
You can catch the next game on the way home. That's the powerful backing of American Express. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/withAmex. Card member entrance access not limited to Amex Platinum Card.
Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. One of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
With my friends Lindsay Gibbs and Ben Lindbergh, I'm Alex Kirshner, still with you on Hang Up. You have probably watched an alternate telecast in the past few years for at least a few minutes. The Manning brothers do one on Monday Night Football most weeks, and the NFL has experimented with other alternate telecasts of its games featuring the EA Sports Madden video game, The Simpsons, Toy Story, and soon another one in the playoffs, the famous Nickelodeon game for kids. Pat McAfee, the company's biggest or second biggest star now, along with Stephen A. Smith, has done his own field-level broadcasts for certain big college games. And I'm talking about the NFL and college football a lot, but they're not the only places doing it. Baseball has a StatCast alternate broadcast for select games, which I've really enjoyed watching. I bet, Ben, you have too. Mm-hmm. Goes through granular pitch data and probabilistic measurements during the games. The NBA has done a Mickey Mouse game. The NHL has even dabbled with a Big City Greens game, playing off the cartoon franchise alongside Disney. All of this has prompted some reckoning, I would say, in our industry, sports media. The reporting and commentary outlet Awful Announcing opined the other week, "We've officially reached altcast oversaturation." And the website asked who these things are even for. Lindsay, can you weigh in on that? Have we reached oversaturation, or can you Do you want more? Can you figure out who this is for? Take a crack at it.
It's a lot of questions for a Monday morning, my friend. But, I don't think we've reached saturation until we get like alt-cast Inception, when we get like a live stream of The Simpsons watching the Manning cast watching the NFL game, which I feel like we're just about 3 months away from. Maybe give it a year to practice the animation. But look, I have ADHD and I'm addicted to the internet and multi-screen experience as much as any millennial. I almost am never just watching a sports game. I'm on Blue Sky or whatever social media platform. I'm on the Power Play Slack. I'm second screening. I'm trying to get writing done. So I do kind of get the appeal of, making it a more engaging experience, kind of turning it into a hangout. But also, altcasts really rarely work for me. I just kind of need the regular commentary, as boring as that is. It's part of how I process games. It's part of what keeps me paying attention, and it's just part of my routine, and I get really lost without them. So I think that might be like altcasts are, for the most part, not targeted towards me. Now, of course, altcasts are targeted in different directions. It used to be with like the Coach's Corner and the StatCast that it was a way to super engage hardcore fans who might be. But now you've got this other genre, the Toy Stories, the Simpsons, the Disney cast, which are clearly geared towards the completely casual viewer or the non-viewer and trying to bring in new audiences. We've seen this both in women's sports, where we've had an alt cast of the NCAA Women's Championship the past few years with Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi, which has been very successful. It got 1.4 million viewers this year, which is like really good. But then you also had, over the Olympics, you had Call Her Daddy, Alex Cooper, doing watch parties on Peacock during women's soccer and women's gymnastics. And I watched them to try and critique them. And it was just very clear that I couldn't even really get a good critique because it just wasn't for me. You could hardly follow the game at all. Like, the game was like tiny on the screen, and she's interviewing like Bravo celebrities. So I'm very confused by these. I feel like so much money is being poured into these that I have to wonder if it's worth it. But I also think they're here to stay, and I'm kind of excited to see what the next ridiculous swing is that we see, because it almost feels like we've got an arms race of all casts.
Yeah, it does feel to me like this might, in retrospect, be the point of altcast fatigue, perhaps, or we're approaching that point, or maybe this is peak altcast. We'll see. Famous last words, maybe. I also have very little interest in it personally, but nothing against it either. If it's bringing new people in, if other people are enjoying it, that's great. Based on what we know of the ratings, they're extremely niche compared to the main broadcast. I mean, we're talking tiny fractions in, say, the NFL's case. And it doesn't seem like the ratings are increasing either. It seems like, in the sports and in the broadcast that we've seen multiple data points, it seems like they're going down over time, if anything, which is what I would expect because it feels faddish. There's a novelty value to it, but the novelty value goes away when it's no longer a novelty. So I think there's a kind of a happy medium, and this would continue to be entertaining in limited doses, but we're beyond limited at this point. It seems like almost every few weeks we have another one in some other sport. And I will say, they've improved in some ways. The Simpsons altcast, for instance, was kind of incredible commitment to the bit. I mean, the technology has gotten pretty impressive. When these things started, it was more of a supplement. It was, characters and graphics and animations around the regular game. Now it's just an entire replacement for the regular game. And you have this beyond sports tech and, of course, the Hawkeye data that enables them to turn the players into characters more or less in real time. And so it is kind of cool as a tech demo. But after I see it for a few minutes, I start to think, yeah, I kind of want to see just the regular game again. You know, it helps that like the broadcast crews are into it and you get Mina Kimes and Simpson fans and they're, you know, really like embracing this and having fun with it. And it leads to these kind of, you know, very meta moments where you have Mina Kimes quoting Milhouse, who's quoting Prince, sort of. And it's like layers within layers with this is what it feels like when doves cry. I mean,
yeah,
sometimes it feels a little forced, as if, okay, here's our script of Simpsons references that we've got to get into the game at a certain point. Sometimes it feels a little more natural, but I have to wonder again, yeah, what audience are you capturing? Because if it's big city greens or something, fine. If you're really catering to kids, that's one thing. But The Simpsons in season 36, I'm not sure that's such a magnet for kids. So that feels more like, you know, that's a comedy that was really made for adults all along. And so are you bringing new people in, or are you just kind of cannibalizing your existing audience as people switch over to see, oh, what does this look like? And then get kind of confused because Lisa Simpson is doing a touchdown run. And you're like, wait, who was that actually in real life?
Yes. I think the point of confusion about which fictional character is representing, you know, Jamar Chase or whoever is an interesting one that you could get pretty hung up on if you're watching this in real time.
Yeah.
I think I'm okay with this as long as all casts stay all casts, right? Like, you know, ESPN's got a whole lot of programming outlets to fill. They've got ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPNU. They've got ESPN Plus where they can put things. They've got ESPN's upcoming flagship direct-to-consumer all-in-one product that they're going to roll out likely sometime this year. And so if you put these things on those places and still allow me to just watch the game normally, then great. I have no problem with it. And actually, I would say that certain types of altcasts, if you could call them this, actually really appeal to me insofar as they're sort of the opposite, Ben, of what you're describing. I watched the second half of a blowout college football playoff game the other week between Tennessee and Ohio State on the Skycast channel, where they were just airing the on-field wire camera that's directly behind the play. And there's no commentary, so you just hear the PA announcer of the stadium. And this felt like I was at the game. I think I'm going to do this for any game that I can do it for going forward. And we don't think of that as an altcast because Peyton and Eli Manning aren't sitting on their couches shooting the breeze with Bill Belichick or whoever it might be, or Matthew McConaughey. But it is an alternate telecast that enriches my enjoyment of the game. And so as long as they, one, stay alternate, and two, don't go all the way into the sort of kitschy cross-promotion area, I think there is some upside in these things. And there's limited downside as long as they stay alternate.
Yeah, as long as they keep it cordoned off. I mean, the whole thing is very promotion-based. Obviously, it's no coincidence that ESPN is doing a lot of these with Disney characters. So you get Mickey Mouse and Big City Greens and The Simpsons. Okay, there's kind of this corporate synergy, self-promotion, paying licensing fees to oneself aspect to all of this that's going on. So I don't know if it's really demanded by the public or if it's just like, hey, we own all this hot IP. Let's get it out there in different forms. And you know, there's got to be a considerable expense associated with the broadcast talent, with all the animations, and maybe there's sort of a startup cost associated to that. And then subsequent altcasts you do, you're just kind of porting over the same tech to different characters. But it's not as if there's no cost or no opportunity cost here from a financial standpoint. So I wonder, you know, I guess the proof will be in the pudding. If they keep making these things, then they must think that it's beneficial to the brand or to the bottom line in some sense. And yeah, if it is just catering to different niches, I think that's fine. You mentioned the StatCast broadcasts and the various, you know, enhanced StatCast kind of flavored broadcasts in baseball, and those have been fun. Sometimes it's even too much for me as a super nerd and a numbers nerd. I don't even need that much data in my broadcast, but it can be fun for a while. And if you offer that as just an alternative, then I think that's great. And everyone's happy. In theory, you're pleasing everyone. I do think that the sort of like hang out and just chat while the game is going on format, that can be annoying when ESPN basically ports it into the main broadcast, like Sunday Night Baseball, where you're, talking to players who are mic'd up the entire time and the game almost takes a back seat. But if it's a secondary thing, some people will complain like, oh, it's like a podcast more than a broadcast. And we like podcasts here at Hang Up and Listen. But there is kind of like the game is, in this tiny window. And again, ESPN's tried that with like A-Rod and Michael Kay, which was quite a pairing, and that didn't really seem to resonate with people the way that the Manning brothers and their pre-existing relationship does. So if you're there for the personality and you're fine with the game being in the background, that's okay. I'd rather have that be an option on an altcast than have that be the dominant mode on the main broadcast.
Yeah, there's a vanity project feel to, I think, a lot of these, right? I mean, ESPN or whatever broadcaster, they're already paying all this money for the rights. They're paying all this money for their talent. And, we're already broadcasting. What more can we do with these people and this property to squeeze like the last teeny bit of juice out of the property? So I do think that on that note, Front Office Sports has predicted that ESPN will figure out a way to do an altcast for the NBA, which, makes perfect sense to me, honestly, and I'd probably tune in for that. I wonder if sometimes they're just trying to capture little viral moments that will go on TikTok and get a wider audience and therefore be part of the marketing budget almost. So back to the challenges with it, and this is mainly with the animated versions.
Yeah.
First of all, I read that the Simpsons altcast, that was a Bengals game. I can't remember who their opponent was right now, but it was preventing that game from being flexed out of that spot because they obviously had to plan all the graphics and all the animations and all that stuff way in advance.
Yes.
So if the game that you have selected for this ends up not being the best game, your broadcast flexibility is behind. And also, these games aren't totally live. There's about a minute or a 90-second delay so that they can put in the characters for the big play. So I was watching some of the Simpsons broadcasts and kind of enjoying it. But then I couldn't be watching that really and having my social media up at the same time because everything would be spoiled. So, but I guess if you're trying to just get kids, that's not as big of a deal. But, maybe this is the future. I mean, kids are growing up watching everything on Twitch streams and things like that. Like I said, we all have second screen experiences in some way. Like I said in the beginning, I'm kind of excited to see what is next because with all this money flooding into properties, I disagree with Ben that we have reached saturation. I think this is only the tip of the altcast iceberg.
Yeah. Wow. And there's still some kinks to work out. And the Simpsons broadcast is as impressive as it was. You still have sort of arms and hands not connecting to bodies and, kind of clipping is what we would call it in video games where bodies go through other bodies. And some of that stuff is probably inevitable, even though it's gotten a lot better. But yeah, the social media aspect to this, I think I did see a lot of clips from the Simpsons broadcast being shared. And even though some of these sports are dominant, the NFL, certainly, there's still always the pressure to, yes, you have your captive audience, but can you capture the next generation? And it is hard to reach that generation, regardless of what sport you're talking about, because just the media environment is so fractured and people are on TikTok or on Twitch or whatever it is, YouTube, etc. So if you can find a way into that, again, I don't know that The Simpsons is really going to resonate with Gen Alpha seeing those clips, but if it piques your interest enough to say, what is this? And then you tune in. And some of these outcasts have made an effort to really hold people's hands and kind of onboard people with the sport. For instance, the NBA Christmas Day broadcast, which was Wemby-centric, and they were hoping that they'd get a big audience in France. There was a lot of just explaining the sport aspect to it, which might be off-putting for veterans who are just tuning in to see what if Wemby looked like a Disney character, but would be pretty friendly if you're just watching for the first time because you care about this IP and not the sport itself. So I think they have to find some sort of balance there, unless they are catering entirely to people who would not normally watch.
Oh, I was about to say we need a full altcast from the cat lawyer at the beginning of COVID. That's the only altcast I want to see.
I mean, wow. People love filters and Zoom, and they love to turn themselves into cats with whiskers and everything. So, yeah.
Is this an awkward time to tell you both that I have software on my computer, altcast software, so that you've both looked like Bart and Lisa Simpson this whole time that we've been podcasting this year?
Right.
That is all for this episode. We also have a bonus show that is live right now about sports stories you should get more familiar with as we look toward 2025. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is over there right now, and we will see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Producing this show for us is Alyssa Zhang Perry. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thank you for listening to us this year.
When you're part of a military family, you understand sacrifice and support. At American Public University, we honor your dedication by extending our military tuition savings to your extended family. Parents, spouses, legal partners, siblings, and dependents all qualify for APU's preferred military rate of just $250 per credit hour for undergraduate and master's level programs. American Public University. Value for the whole family. Learn more at apu.apus.edu/military.